Everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back. We're glad that you are here at St. Paul's. My name is Charlie, and I'm the rector of St. Paul's. I've been here since 2019. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here today. Since 1921, the St. Paul's Lenten Lunch and Speaker Series has brought the Richmond community together like it's doing right now. And the goals have always been the same: to enjoy delicious food and cultivate relationships and to explore timely topics related to spirituality and our common life. Our theme this year is pastors, priests, problem solvers, and prophets, everyday leadership in extraordinary times. And the hope is to dig a little bit into what is our landscape looking like for our religious leaders. What are they thinking? What's a challenge? What fills their cup? What's it like to be a leader now? We explore what it looks like to be relevant, and in the case of our speaker today, what it looks like to build small cities. Just what is your pastor thinking? So I hope that you've had some insights as you've listened over these past 5 weeks. Now I would like for you to join me in welcoming our final prophet of this series, the Reverend Dr. Lance Watson. Lance, welcome. You want to do a microphone check?
Check, 1, 2, 3.
Check, 1, 2, 3. Good. We never know, you know. Lance, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
I've heard a lot about you. I've never met you.
Good to be here.
People love you.
That's wonderful.
Why? A special welcome to St. Paul's Baptist. Any St. Paul's Baptists in the house? All right, welcome. Glad you're here. I was just there last night for the Nehemiah Action event.
Yes.
It was a packed house. You've got a very large parking lot.
God is great.
Yes, sir. Can we start? I want to hear just a little bit about your growing up. Where were you born? Were you always a part of a churchy environment?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I am the 15th of 17 children.
Holy moly. Yeah.
Born to Roseman and Doretha Watson. We were raised in the church. We were always in the church. If it had been another time, my maternal grandmother would have been a preacher, but in the Baptist church at that time, women were limited in terms of their aspirations. So the best she could be was a missionary, but she was faithful at being that, and she participated with my parents in trying to raise us in the church.
Okay.
So church is home for me.
Right, and in some churches, you are the church with 17, 18 of you, right? That's a lot of people.
Yeah. Well,
if y'all didn't show up, that'd be half of my congregation in some places.
I used to joke with my father. I said, you needed cable TV in the worst kind of way. Yeah.
Talk more about church, though. What was it like for you? I mean, did you go? I know you went probably because your family wanted you to. It was an expectation, but did you like it?
Well, I actually joined the church at 5 years old, which was a shock to my parents, but I was sitting there with my grandmother listening to the preacher preach, and he was talking about the need to have your own personal relationship with God, and so I was a pretty precocious 5-year-old, so I jumped up out of my seat and ran down the aisle and gave him my hand and said, I want to be a part of the church. And the next month, I was baptized at 5 years old, and part of their process of discipleship was the Sunday school. So they put me in the kindergarten Sunday school class, which they felt was the appropriate place for me to be. And right after the class, I requested a meeting with the pastor. And my grandmother said, what do you want to meet with the pastor about? And I said, well, I'll tell him about it. So he gave me a meeting, a 5-year-old, right?
All right.
And I said, Pastor Wilson, I said, I would like to be moved to the first grade class. And he said, but you're only 5 years old and, you're in kindergarten with everybody else. I said, yeah, but all those kids are crying for their mama. I want to learn something about God.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So you were overqualified.
Yeah, I guess.
From an early age.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, maybe from that question, it sounds like you took the fast track.
I did.
Talk about your call to be in ministry. Like you probably had a lot of options and a lot of ideas, and you're a very gifted person. How did you focus on ministry as your direction?
Well, my grandma recognized pretty early on that I was a talker. Imagine that, right? And so she started putting me up to do things in church, to recite poems, to be in the Easter pageant, to be in the Christmas play. And when I gathered with my brothers and sisters, one of the favorite things we did was play church. And when we played church, I always had to be the preacher. I never wanted to be an usher, never wanted to be a deacon, never wanted to be in the choir. I wanted to preach. And so I would preach to them often, and she observed that in me. So by the time that I was maybe 11 years old, I began to sense that there was a relationship between my ability to speak and maybe something God wanted to do in my life. So again, I requested a meeting with the pastor and told the pastor I felt like I was called to preach. And he put me up to preach at 12 years old on a Sunday morning, right, with his Sunday morning crowd. And we started there and proceeded. So I began at 12 years old.
Whoa. And so it sounds like it kind of came naturally to you, right?
Yeah, it was there. It was there all the time. And it often got me into trouble because I didn't know when to turn it off. I had...
Okay. Like, here comes Lance. He's going to preach again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I preached all the way through middle school, all the way through high school. I was raised in an area that, unfortunately, was run by street gangs. But none of the gangs bothered me. Their nickname for me was Preach, because whenever I would show up, I had these tracks, these cartoon tracks about a relationship with God. And my first question was always the same. Can I talk to you about a relationship with God? Do you know Jesus, right? In fact, I met my wife trying to evangelize her in junior high school.
Junior high school, okay.
Yeah, in junior high school, my first question to her was, can I talk to you about the love of Jesus? She said, yeah, but tell me your name first.
All right, nice. Let's talk about Jesus, but I want to talk about you too, right? I love that. Yeah. Now, you mentioned preaching at an early age, and I would imagine you saw a lot of preaching. You saw a lot of preachers. A lot of our speakers over the last 5 weeks have talked about the importance of preaching and the role that it plays in their lives and the way it fills their cup. Same with me. Who are some of your preaching parents?
I've got a lot of them.
Okay, give me 2 or 3.
Okay, I'll give you the most pivotal person in my preaching journey was Dr. Frederick Sampson, who led the Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit. And I say he was pivotal because I started at 12, and by the time that I was 18, I decided I was going to quit preaching and that I was just going to go and make money. And so I started working for Ford, and I did exactly that. I made a lot of money. And it was Dr. Sampson who intervened in my life at a particular point to kind of guide me back to my calling and my vocation and what it was that God was trying to do in my life. He happened to be an incredible preacher. I mean, 6'7" guy, tall, stately, poetic, profound, eloquent in his presentation, and all of that was influential to me. I've been blessed to earn 6 degrees in universities, right? And people ask me, what motivated you? Well, the reason I earned 6 is that Dr. Sampson had 5. and I was trying to be like Doc. Now, he never finished his doctoral degree, which was part of the motivation for me to get the 6th one and actually finish my doctoral degree. But he was a huge preaching influence in my life. He wasn't the only one. I was also influenced by Dr. Charles Adams, who led the Hartford Church in Detroit, by Dr. Cornell Talley, who led the New Light Church in Detroit, and so many others across time.
Mm-hmm. Was it the tradition of that style of preaching that pulled you in? And I'm wondering if you have ever, do you find in your own preaching that you veer or that you stretch that in some way? I mean, how do you approach your sermons and the messages that you want people to hear?
Well, I believe that every preacher is born out of a tradition. I also believe that no preacher is greater than the tradition out of which they are born. That our preaching, our thinking, the way we approach the text, the way we exegete, how we do hermeneutics and homiletics are all influenced by the tradition out of which we come. I also think it's our responsibility to critique that tradition, and in critiquing it, to stretch it and shape it in ways that make it relevant for the cultural hour in which we find ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that word critique. And when people hear, I grew up in the art world, right, and in the music world. So all of my life has been spent putting my stuff in front of people and having people critique it. This is not a lot different. As you probably can attest.
Right.
But I heard once that some people find critique challenging and some people find critique liberating. You know, the ability to critique. How would you respond to that?
I think it early on in my ministry it was challenging, right? Because I never will forget, and she's a dear heart. She's still a member of St. Paul's Baptist Church. And when I was preaching there as a supply preacher, which is like an itinerant, they bring them in. I was in seminary. They were without a pastor. And this particular sister, she came up to me after the service and she said, you know, I have something to say to you. And I said, okay, you know, I'm the guest preacher. What I care, you know, say what you want to say, right? And she said, you know, you're a good preacher. You got great information, but there's something wrong with your sermons. And I said, something wrong? Well, what's wrong with my sermons? She said, I am an insurance agent. She said, I sell insurance policies all day long. She said, and what's wrong with your sermons is you present great information, but you never ask for the sale. And what you need to do is start asking for the sale. Now, that hurt when she said it because I was young, you know, and all I wanted to hear was, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? But I took her critique and I began to incorporate it into my approach. And she was right on the money. I mean,
what does she mean by that? What does that mean, the sale?
What she meant is there was no hook to the sermon. There was no point at which I asked people to act on what they were hearing.
Okay.
I just presented it, you know, and that was it.
Yeah, there was no real, the sermon, that's what I call it, the sermon never got started.
Right.
You can listen to a sermon for 10 minutes, 15, but the sermon starts at a particular moment, I think, as we listen, or at least. So maybe that's the way I hear what she...
I've been blessed by the tradition of this church. I've been coming to St. Paul's Episcopal since Bob Hetherington was the rector. So everybody here knows I've been here a long time.
Yeah.
And I was immediately stretched by the tradition of this church because the Lenten service was like 30 minutes long. And the people at St.
That's your sermon.
Well, yeah, the people at St. Paul, the people that I served, they showed up because they were like, it take Rev 15 minutes to clear his throat.
Right.
He's not going to be able to pull it off.
Yeah.
But what it did was it forced me with the messages to strip off anything that was not essential to the primary point I was trying to make. And so it helped me in that regard to be more focused. Of course, once I left, I added all that back in.
Yeah, you'll get a kick out of this. I'm doing some teaching right now at a seminary. I do teaching labs with preacher students, and they've got to preach 10 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they were like, do you ever preach 10 minutes? I'm like, well, So I challenged myself to preach 10 minutes. And it takes discipline.
Oh, yeah.
You really got to know what you want to say and how you're going to say it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to hear, have you always been a big thinker?
No. I think I developed the capacity. Well, I take that back because I think about myself at 9 years old when this calling was stirring in me. And my brothers and sisters were tired of playing church with me as the preacher. So as a result, I started this practice of preaching to nature. So I would be on the back porch preaching to the grass. And my mother is like, what are you doing out there? And I said, I'm preaching. And she said, to who? And I said, to my congregation. She said, where are they? I said, you see all that grass? I've got a whole lot of members. So I had
sounds very
big
Abrahamic,
dreams
as
then.
many as the stars in the sky and the sands.
Yeah. And so I've always been a kind of a dreamer person, but I think that over time I cultivated that capacity in an even larger way to begin to imagine that there might be life beyond what I understood life to be. And it has blessed me, and I would hope that it has blessed people with whom I've had contact.
Mm-hmm. And so much of what we do as clergy, as leaders, as the title of this series indicates, it's a mix of vision, it's a mix of spirituality and spiritual thinking and helping people be still and getting people riled up, but it's also business.
Yes.
Isn't it? I mean, we were talking about that back there, about that there's all types of elements involved in what it is that we do. Do you like that mix of things that gets thrown at you every day?
I've grown to like it over time. Of course, I have favorite things to do, and like preaching and teaching are among them. I enjoy counseling. I enjoy when I have the opportunity to counsel. Counseling is time intensive, but there's nothing quite like talking to somebody and seeing the light come on in their eyes, knowing that they get what it is you're trying to say and that it's helpful to them in some way. So I enjoy teaching, preaching, counseling, and I've grown to enjoy the business aspects of the church as well, although they can be cumbersome at times because it's easy to get lost in the weeds and lose the larger vision of what it is we're trying to do in terms of moving the organization of the church forward.
Mm-hmm. How is it that you would like to see the organization of the church evolve? What is it that you want to move forward about church into the world and into people's lives?
Well, part of what we're working on, our big project right now is called the City of Possibility, and St. Paul's has purchased over 300 acres of land, and we're working together to build a planned community that will include several different residential neighborhoods, some commercial development, office development, educational space, and of course, seniors housing, memory care facility. It's a big, big project. The build out is about 10 years, right? So that qualifies as a big dream.
I would say.
Yeah. And so we've been working on that, and the driver behind it, why we call it the City of Possibility, is that it emerged out of a single idea that all things are possible for those that believe. It also emerged out of the idea that the church should make an impact on the culture that is not just intangible, but can be seen in tangible ways. One of my favorite statements is that faith is not just about pie in the sky by and by as you fly once you die, but it ought to be about something sound on the ground that can be found by the pound while you're still around.
I'm going to need you to write that down. Let's fit on a bookmark. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, that's the
faith.
Jay-Z influence when you hear him rhyme like that.
Yeah, well, you should collaborate with him. I'm sure you could make that happen. How do you, leadership is about taking those big ideas and spinning them out into action items. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, that is a big dream, to take that idea of yours and turn it into something. Like, have you always been a person that intuitively knows how to do that?
No. I do want to say that in terms of taking the dream and making it into actionable items, that I have to underscore here that the church that I've been blessed to serve for 38 years has had in it some absolutely incredible people. And what I mean by that is people who were willing to take what they believed and act on it.
Right.
And that's absolutely incredible to find in a group of people. And mind you now, when I first came to St. Paul's, I was in my 20s. I'd never led a church. And so to find a group of people who were willing to take a risk with you, you know, and not just hear you, but support you and follow you and nurture you, and then periodically pull you aside and say, you may want to rethink that idea, you know. It has been an incredible benediction in my life, an incredible blessing, and that continues to this day, that I don't think it is possible to turn vision into reality if it just resides with the leader.
Right.
I think that a host of people have to share that vision in order to make it a reality.
Right. Shared leadership, shared partnership.
Yes.
It's very hard to do if it's just you.
Yes, and it
it's
requires humility on our part. And in this sense, that people say to me often, how did you come up with the vision you have at St. Paul's? And what I share with them is I say, I didn't. It was already in the people. I said, my job was to help them see what they were already seeing and believe that it could happen.
I love it. Talk about what gets you down. What you have those days and you're fired up. It's like, oh, this is great. I love doing what I do. Talk about the other days. What are the things that
probably in the course of ministry, the only thing that gets me down is people fighting each other. Because I'm a lover. I'm not a fighter. Ask my wife. I mean, I'm sorry, that probably didn't go right there, but
I'm gonna leave that. That one drop.
Yeah. But I don't. I think that we can have disagreements because if two people agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary. So I think we can have disagreements, but when we allow them to degenerate into affect our ability to trust each other and work with each other, then it becomes something else, you know. So I don't like fighting.
Yeah, don't like fighting. Does that mean that you don't like conflict or tension?
Well, I can handle tension. I can manage conflict if it occurs, but I don't prefer it. I prefer conversation. I prefer communication. And that expands beyond the walls of the church. Like looking at our political environment, one of the things that brings me heartburn is we have lost the ability to collaborate with people who don't see life the same way we do. And we have separated ourselves into these binary camps where you're either over here or over there. And life is not constructed that way, that all positive change is built on the ability to collaborate, even with people with whom I disagree on certain things, because two people never agree on anything totally,
Yeah.
and so it's give and take. It's that C word, it's compromise. I don't get my way all the time. I have to give some in order to get some. And I think that that probably gives me more heartburn than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Why church? Why is the church important today?
Well, I still believe that the local church is the salvation of the world. I think that we are put in the world, as Jesus said, to be the salt of the earth, the salt of the gospel sprinkled on the meat of life, that we have the ability, if we allow God to use us in that way, to preserve culture, to flavor culture in such a way that it becomes redemptive and restorative.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite story about Jesus?
Oh, wow. I don't know that I have one favorite. I mean, I love all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are more difficult to understand at times.
What's the story about Jesus that most reflects who you believe Jesus to be?
When he